Lastly, we'll look at how the Mayans set up their government and then ultimately, how it fell. The Mayan Empire was not really an empire at all. It was instead a bunch of loosely connected city-states that each had their own ruler. At no time, that historians have found, was there ever one king or emperor that ruled all of the Mayans. This would prove to be a problem later, when the Spanish arrived and the Mayans lacked unity. Of these city-states, two tended to dominate. Tikal and Palenque, though they had their down years, were generally the two most powerful.
But the evolution of the Maya civilization into this complex network of city-states didn't happen overnight.
The Maya came into existence probably a couple of thousand years before Christ.
By 500 BC, population was on the rise, and small communities were turning into the first major Maya sites located throughout Central America. Fully organized kingdoms were ruling the region by 250 AD, with mighty rulers at the helm.
They had powerful rulers. They were in competition with each other, and sometimes this competition led to war.
For the Maya, it was war led by kings in the name of the gods.
Maya kings were people like us, but for the Maya, they definitely had attributes of the supernatural.
The price of devotion had brutal and sometimes deadly consequences.
People owed a blood debt to the gods. It wasn't that they didn't regard human life or human blood highly. Quite the contrary. Human blood and human life was the most precious, the most sacred thing that could be offered to the gods in order to repay the blood debt that was incurred at creation.
Bloodletting and human sacrifice dominated the king's strategic thinking. They picked allies and attacked neighbors, all with an eye on appeasing their deities and staying autonomous.
Unlike Rome, in the case of the Maya, we're not dealing with one empire. Instead, we're dealing with a series of rival kingdoms.
By the 3rd century AD, Maya civilization was flourishing. No one city ever succeeded in dominating all the others, but one seat of power was on the rise. Its name was Tikal.
Tikal was the largest and most powerful city in the south. Even today many of Tikal's huge buildings still stand. Near Tikal was Palenque, which was home to King Pakal, one of the most powerful Mayan kings. We'll talk a bit more about him later. A third important city-state, but which grew later than the others, was Chichen Itza. The pyramids of Chichen Itza remain in great condition even today. It is home to the Temple of the Jaguar, which is an amazing monument. These states traded with each other often. They spoke the same, or at least very similar, languages, which made it easy. The northern city-states had very good farmland, and would trade their crops to the southern city-states, which had access to resources, like jade and obsidian. Jade was used for jewelry and obsidian was used to make very sharp knives like the one seen here. It wasn't always peaceful though. The city-states often went to war with each other, and sometimes for no reason other than they needed more prisoners to sacrifice. The main period of the Mayan civilization is called the Classic Age. Pretty much everything we've talked about so far happened during the Classic Age, which is basically about the same time as the Dark Ages were in Europe. The city-states were built and grew, math was explored, etc. It was also at this time that religion dominated the thoughts and lives of the Mayans. During the entire age the Mayans were growing in population and power. While Europe was falling apart, the Mayans were growing incredibly. But then it all just sort of fell apart, and even today we are not quite sure why. Around the year 900 AD the Mayan civilization collapsed. The people seem to have simply abandoned their homes and towns.
The first great period of Mayan civilization lasted from 300 to 900 AD and was over before the Aztecs arrived in Central America. We still have no certain knowledge of why that particular civilization suddenly and mysteriously collapsed. It was most probably a combination of factors, such as population growth, pressure on resources, overexploitation of the land, or even foreign invasion. The great cities were mainly abandoned. Although the Maya continued to flourish in North Yucatan and the east coast of the peninsula, as well as the Guatemalan highlands.
Conventionally, the great period of classic Maya civilization is over by 900 or 1200 AD, depending on how you regard it. But the later Maya, the so-called post-classic Maya, lived through to the conquest, which made them contemporary with the Aztecs in the highlands. And as the Aztec Empire expanded from the basin of Mexico further and further into the lowlands, eventually the Aztec world came up against the Maya world.
It's important to remember that the Mayan civilization changed and adapted. They were still very much in evidence when Cortés landed and were a more difficult enemy to subdue than the Aztecs. While the Aztec Empire collapsed in about 2 years, it took much longer to subdue the Maya.
Historians have a number of theories as to what might have happened, but they all seem to center around the kings. The Mayans had such great faith in their kings that, whenever something went bad, like say a long period without rain, they didn't know what to do. If their kings were so close to the gods, why couldn't they stop the bad times? The kings ended up giving more and more sacrifices to please the gods, but the troubles continued. At some point it seems things just got so bad that the people just gave up and left their cities entirely. What we don't know is what exactly set them off. There are many ideas about what might have happened. As I mentioned before, some historians believe it was a long drought that started it all. This may have led to a large famine, which means a lack of food. If people were starving, they would have tried to plant even more, which could have ruined the land. More modern theories say the problem was a great amount of war. These wars may have caused fear among the people and could have harmed the land as soldiers marched over crops. Believe it or not, there are even some people who believe the disappearance was caused by aliens. I know that seems crazy, but it would help explain where the Mayans got such advanced technology. Take a look at this carving. It is from the tomb of King Pakal. What do you see? No one is completely sure what it is, but most historians say it shows King Pakal leaving the underworld. I think though, if you really look closely, it looks like Pakal is riding some type of spaceship. Maybe it was aliens after all. What makes things even weirder is that, after about 300 years, the Mayans started to rebuild their civilization. People returned to the cities and many of the old traditions began again. They never did reach the level of the classic period again though. They remained disconnected. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they slowly wiped out the Mayans, city by city. It took a long time, since they were so spread out, but the Mayans could not unite against the invaders. This was the end of the Mayan civilization. The Spaniards burned Mayan books and punished anyone who followed the old Mayan traditions or spoke the Mayan language. They felt the Mayans and their sacrifices were a sin against God and they wanted them stopped. Thank you for joining us for this lecture. I hope you found the Mayans as interesting as I do. Join us next time when we'll look at the Aztecs and the Incas. Bye bye.